One note before the story. File saving the outputs artifacts in present file step isn't available to me in this conversation, so I'm delivering everything inline, the title above, the full story below, then both tracker entries you can paste into your files. If you want true downloadable artifacts here, turning on code execution in settings enables that. Either way, the work's all here. She came up my road in the last gray hour before dark, and the first thing I knew of her was the dog going stiff and quiet on the porch instead of barking, which a good dog does only for the dying or the desperate. I'd been 15 years on Mill Creek by then, 11 of them alone, and in all that time I had let exactly nobody up that road who hadn't a reason I'd already agreed to. I had buried my wife under the cottonwood the second spring, and I had buried most of the rest of myself a little at a time after, the way a man does when he decides feeling things costs more than it's worth. I ran cattle, I mended my own fences, I traded fair and spoke seldom, and the town of Burnt Fork had long since quit expecting Jonah Teague to be anything warmer than the weather. So when I came around the corner of the barn with a lantern, and found a woman standing at the foot of my steps with her shawl frozen stiff as bark and her lips gone the color of a bruise, my first thought was not kindness. My first thought was trouble, and the second was that trouble in this country generally came looking for the man it belonged to, and I didn't recall owning any. "You're on Teague land," I said, not unkind, just plain. "I know whose land it is." Her voice shook with the cold, but not, I noticed, with fear. There's a difference, and a man who's been alone long enough learns to hear it. "They told me in Burnt Fork that Jonah Teague keeps to himself and doesn't ask questions. I walked here on the strength of it. If that's not true, tell me now and I'll keep walking." It was full dark by then and dropping cold fast, the kind of high country cold that comes down off the caldera rim like a hand closing. She'd no horse, no bag to speak of, just a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth held against her chest like the one thing in the world worth keeping warm. And she'd walked. I did the arithmetic of it. The nearest place she could have come from on foot was 9 miles, and the weather she'd come through would have killed a soft person somewhere around the 6th. She was not soft. That was the second thing I learned about her before I learned her name. "There's no place to keep walking to," I said. "Not tonight. You'll freeze in the open before you make the Diet's place." I stood there a moment with the lantern between us, the two of us measuring each other, and I'll tell you honest, I came near to telling her to bed down in the barn and be gone at first light, which would have been the cautious thing and the cold thing both. The barn was warm enough with the stock in it. A man could say he'd done right by a stranger and still keep his door shut. But she was shaking and trying not to, standing straight up under it the way you stand up under a thing you've decided you will not let beat you. And something about that, the steel of it, the way she'd not ask me for one thing but the truth, put me in mind of nobody I wanted to be put in mind of, and I heard myself say the words before I'd rightly decided to. "Come inside, there's a fire." Her name was Wren Calloway, and she gave it to me over the second cup of coffee. Once the shaking had quit, and the color had come back into her enough that I'd stopped wondering if I'd have a dead woman on my floor by morning. "My father was a harness maker," she said, "in Sable down on the freight road. The best in the county, I'll say that, and it's not a daughter's bragging, it's the truth. You can ask any teamster who ever bought a set of traces off him. He could cut and stitch a collar that wouldn't gall a horse in 1,000 miles. She turned the cup in her hands. They were good hands, I noticed. Strong, scarred small along the thumb the way leatherworkers' hands get. He died in the fall, lung fever. And it turned out that the year before, when the work was thin and he was already sick, he'd borrowed against the shop. From who? From Royal Pell. I knew the name. Everybody in 3 counties knew the name. Royal Pell ran the biggest freight yard between the railhead and the high camps, and he had a way of running a great many other things besides notes, debts, the mortgages of men who'd come up short of a hard winter. He was not, by the law's narrow lights, a criminal. He simply understood better than most men how a debt is a kind of rope, and how a patient man can let out the rope and let out the rope until the day he decides to pull it tight. Pell holds the note, I said. Pell holds the note. She looked at the fire and nodded at me. And when my father died, Pell came to the shop with the note and a paper drawn up by his own clerk, and he told me the debt was more than the shop and the tools and everything in it would fetch at sale. He showed me the figures. He'd added on interest I never knew was owed and charges and a thing he called a service against the estate, and by the time his clerk had finished, the sum had near doubled what my father borrowed. She drew a breath. And then Pell told me there was a way to clear it. He said a man in his position needed a wife who could keep his books and run his house, and that a harness maker's daughter was a practical sort of woman, and that if I'd consent to marry him, the debt would be considered settled. The fire popped. The dog had settled by her feet, which the dog did for no one. And you said no, I said. I said no. For the first time something close to a smile moved at the corner of her mouth, and there was no warmth in it at all, only iron. He didn't take it for an answer. He's a man who's never been told no and believed it. He gave me till the turn of the month to come to my senses, those were his words, come to my senses, and he set his man Dolph to keeping an eye on the shop so I wouldn't get notions about leaving. And 3 nights ago the month turned. She lifted the little oilcloth bundle from her lap and set it on the table between us and unwrapped it, and inside were a set of leather-working tools, an edger, a creaser, a round knife with a handle worn smooth, and all, a roll of waxed thread laid out neat as a surgeon's. My father's tools. I took them and I went out the back while Dolph was in the saloon and I walked. I've slept 2 nights cold. I heard a man's name in a town that said he asked no questions. So here I am, Mr. Teague, eating your bread and telling you the whole truth of it, because you'll hear it crooked from someone soon enough and I'd rather you heard it straight from me. I am a woman, a powerful man says belongs to him for a debt. If that's more trouble than you'll have under your roof, I understand it, and I'll go at first light and not hold it against you. I sat a long while with that. I'll not pretend I didn't think about Pell. A man like Pell, you don't cross him for free, and I'd spent 11 years making sure nothing and nobody could cost me anything, because I'd already paid out everything I had under that cottonwood and I'd resolved never to be in a position to pay again. The smart thing, the cold thing, was to feed her and send her on and let it be some other man's business. But I kept looking at those tools laid out on my table, kept and carried through 9 miles of killing cold when she could have carried food instead, and I thought, that's a woman who means to make her own way. That's not a woman running to be kept. That's a woman running so she can keep herself. A debt's a debt, I said finally, but a woman's not a debt. No paper Royal Pell's clerk ever drew up makes her one. That's not law, that's just a man with money calling a thing his because he wants it. I stood and took her cup in mine. You can stay till you're on your feet. There's a room was my wife's sewing room. It's got a bed and a stove and a door that bolts from the inside, and you'll have the key to it tonight and every night. I'll not have it said, by you or by me or by anybody, that you stayed here on any terms but your own. She looked at me then, really looked, the way you look at a thing to find the trick in it. And what do you want for it? Work, if you're able and willing, I said. I've got harness in that barn hasn't been right since my wife's father did the last of it, and I'm a poor hand with an awl. If you can put a ranch's worth of leather to rights, you'll earn your keep honest and I'll keep account of it and you'll know to the penny what you've earned. That's all I want. I'm too old and too tired to want anything I'd have to lie to get. I have thought about that night many times in the years since. I have thought that a man can spend a decade telling himself his heart is buried and his door is shut, and the whole time the bolt's been off the lock, and all it takes is the right knock and the right cold to find it out. She slept behind a bolted door that night with the key in her own hand. And in the morning, before I'd even got the fire going good, I heard from the barn the small, steady sound of a creaser run along leather, and I stood in my own kitchen and listened to it. And for the first time in a long time the place didn't sound empty. She worked like I've seldom seen anyone work, man or woman. By the end of that first week, she'd gone through my harness like a hard frost goes through soft ground, and what came out the other side was better than anything I'd had on the place. She rebuilt a breeching that had been patched so many times it was more patch than leather. She cut me a new set of traces out of the side leather I'd had curring in the loft, and stitched them with that wax thread of her father's, 2 needles working against each other the way the real leatherworkers do it, so the seam holds even if a stitch breaks. She found the place where my best gelding's collar had been galling him. I'd been blamming the horse for going sour, and she patted it and reshaped it, and inside a fortnight that horse was working sweet as a colt. And she kept the account herself, in a hand small and even, every hour of work and what it was worth, and she'd show it to me of an evening and ask was it fair, and I'd say it was more than fair, and she'd say no, fair was fair and not a penny more, and we'd argue about it in the only way we ever argued, which was each of us trying to give the other the better of it. She doctored stock too, which I hadn't known to ask of her. A heifer went down with a hard birth in the 2nd week, and I'd given her up for lost. The calf turned wrong inside her, and Wren rolled her sleeves and went into the elbow and worked that calf around by feel, talking low to the heifer the whole time, and brought it out alive and the cow with it. She stood up after with blood to her shoulder and the new calf wobbling up onto its legs in the straw, and she had a look on her face I hadn't seen there yet, not steel, but something underneath the steel, a kind of fierce gladness, and I thought, watching her, that whatever Royal Pell believed he'd bought, he hadn't the first idea what he was buying. He thought he was getting a practical woman to keep his books. He didn't know he was reaching for a fire and calling it a candle. The town talked, of course. A town like Burnt Fork always does. A widower and an unmarried woman under one roof was meat enough for the church step gossips, and it didn't help that I'd never been a man to explain myself. I let them talk, but I'll own it stung me on her account, not mine. I was past caring what Burnt Fork made of Jonah Teague, but on hers, because she'd come here clean and the town was busy making her something she wasn't. So I did a thing I hadn't planned. The 3rd Sunday she'd been with me, I hitched the wagon and drove us both into Burnt Fork in the broad daylight, her up on the seat beside me in a good dress she'd remade from one of my wife's that I'd told her to take, and I walked her down the main street past every gossip in the county, and I stopped at the Mercantile, and I said to Hetty Dawes who ran it and who could carry a piece of news faster than the telegraph. This is Miss Wren Calloway. She's the finest harness hand in this country, and she's working for me at a fair wage, and she's got a bolted room under my roof and her own key to it, and any man or woman who'd like to say otherwise can come say it to me direct. I set down my list. She'll be needing thread and a set of half-round punches and a good edge tool, and you'll put it on my account, and she'll work it off, and that's the whole of the business between us. Hetty Dawes looked at Wren, and Wren looked back at her steady and unashamed, and didn't drop her eyes, and that, more than anything I said, settled it. The town can forgive a thing a great deal easier than it can forgive someone who acts ashamed of it. By the time we drove back out of Burnt Fork that afternoon, I'd say half the town had decided we were respectable, and the other half had decided we were interesting, and either way the meanest of the talk dried up. It was on the drive home, in the long gold light coming sideways off the Caldera rim, that she said to me, not looking at me, looking out at the country, "You didn't have to do that. I know it. Pell will hear of it, that you've stood up for me in town. He'll take it for a thing it isn't. Then he'll take it wrong, same as he's taken everything else wrong." I clucked to the team, "Let him." She was quiet a while, then, "Why are you doing this, Jonah?" It was the first time she'd used my given name. I noticed it the way you notice the first warm day after a long winter small, and then not small at all. I thought about it honestly, because she'd given me nothing but honesty, and I'd not insult her with less. "My wife," I said, "Mary, she died of a sickness 11 years back, and I couldn't do one thing to stop it. Sat by her bed and watched it take her, and there was nothing, no money, no hard work, no standing up to anybody, nothing a man could do but watch." The team's harness creaked, her stitching holding sound. I decided after that I'd never again be in a place where something I cared about could be taken and me not able to stop it, so I quit caring. It's cheaper. I shook my head. Then a woman comes up my road in the cold carrying her dead father's tools because somebody's trying to take her, and the difference is, this time there's something I can do. I can stand in the way, so I'm going to. She didn't say anything to that. But when I helped her down from the wagon at home, her hand stayed in mine a half a breath longer than it needed to, and neither of us made anything of it out loud, and both of us knew. Royal Pell's man Dolph came up the Mill Creek Road on a Tuesday, riding a good horse badly, the way a town man rides. I was at the corral and Wren was in the barn, and the dog gave me warning long before Dolph cleared the trees. I walked out to meet him in the open, where I could see him, and he could see I'd a rifle in the crook of my arm, not pointed, just there, the way a man carries a rifle on his own land, and I stood in the middle of my own road and made him stop short of the house. "Mr. Teague," he stayed mounted, which suited me, "you've got something belongs to my employer." "I've got a hired hand named Calloway working leather in my barn," I said. "If you mean her, she belongs to herself. You can tell Pell I said so." Dolph smiled the way a man smiles when he's bringing somebody else's threat and enjoying the loan of it. "There's a paper, a debt. The woman's pledged against it. Mr. Pell's a patient man, but his patience has a bottom to it and you're standing on it." He leaned on his saddle horn. "You're a sensible man, Teague, everybody says it. A man who keeps to himself. It'd be a shame to make yourself Royal Pell's business over a debt that's not yours." "You're right that the debt's not mine," I said. "And it's not hers neither, not the part of it Pell's clerk padded out of thin air. A man can hold a note. He can't hold a person. That's not in any law I know, and if Pell thinks it is, let him bring his paper to the county and let a judge read it and we'll see whose figures stand up to daylight." I shifted the rifle easy. "You've delivered your message. Now you're trespassing. The road out is the same one you came in by." He held my eye a moment, hunting for fear and not finding it, and then he reined around. But before he went, he looked past me at the barn, where Wren had come to stand in the doorway with the round knife still in her hand, and he said, loud enough for her to hear, "He'll come himself next, and he doesn't come to talk." Then he rode off down the road badly, and I stood watching the dust of him until it settled, and when I turned around Wren was beside me, and she'd gone pale but her jaw was set. "You should send me on," she said. "Now, tonight, before he comes. I'll go north, I'll lose myself in the high camps, you can tell Pell I ran off and you don't know where." "No, Jonah." "No," I said it gentle, but I said it like the rock the creek runs over. "You've run 2 nights cold already in your life, and that's too many. You're not running again. Not from him, not from anything, not while there's a roof here and a man under it willing to stand in the door." I looked down at her. "Unless you want to go. That's different. If you want to go because going's what you want, I'll hitch the wagon myself and take you anywhere in this country you name and not say a word against it." "That's your right, and I'd never take it from you. But if the only reason you're talking about leaving is to keep trouble off of me, then no. I didn't take you in to spend you. I'm not Pell. I'll not treat your staying or your going as a thing I get to settle." She stood there with the round knife in her hand and her father's tools in the barn behind her and the whole long road of her trouble in front of her, and I watched her make the choice. I watched her decide. And what she decided was to stay, not because she'd no other place. She'd proved she could walk to another place through killing cold, but because she chose to. There's all the difference in the world in that, and I've never forgotten it. "All right," she said, "then we'll meet him." It was the first time either of us had said it. What I did next I didn't tell her, not at first, because I wasn't sure it would come to anything, and I'd not raise a hope I couldn't keep. I rode to Sable, 2 days down the freight road, to the town Wren had come from, and I asked questions, quiet ones, the kind a man asks when he's known for asking none, so they get answered. I found the teamsters who'd bought harness off her father for 20 years, and they spoke of him the way men speak of an honest craftsman who's gone, which is the truest eulogy there is. And I found, because I went looking, the thing I'd hoped to find. Her father's books. Old Calloway had been a careful man. the way the best craftsmen are careful, and he'd kept his own ledger of every dealing, in a small neat hand much like his daughter's, and when he died the books had gone to the bank in Sable against the day the estate was settled, and there they sat. It took me a letter and a fee and the word of 2 teamsters to get a look at them, and when I did, I found what I'd suspected from the first night Wren told me her story. The debt was real. Calloway had borrowed, right enough, $80 against the shop in a thin year, but Calloway had also paid it down steady, in goods and in coin, harness traded against the note, sums marked in his own hand and dated and witnessed, until by the season he died the true balance owing to Royal Pell was not the $240 Pell's clerk had written down. It was $31 and some cents. Pell had taken a $31 debt and a dead man's silence, and a daughter with no one to stand for her, and he'd drawn it up into a sum he could use as a rope. I copied it all out, every figure, witnessed and sworn before the magistrate in Sable, and I went home with it folded in my coat against my chest the way Wren had carried her tools, and I knew now we'd not be meeting Royal Pell on his ground. We'd be meeting him on ours. He came himself on a cold, bright morning a week later, the way Dolph had promised, and he didn't come to talk. He came with Dolph and 2 other men and a buggy, and the air of a man arriving to collect a thing he's already decided is his, and he pulled up in my yard, and he didn't get down, just sat there in his good coat looking at my place like he was pricing it. "Teague," he said, "I've come for the woman, the debt's called, I've been more than patient." He took out a paper, his paper, the padded one, $240 or the pledge against it. You can read figures. I'd think a rancher could find $240 before he'd find trouble with me, but I don't expect you can, so I'll take what's pledged and we'll call it square. Wren came out onto the porch and stood beside me. She didn't hide behind me and I didn't put her behind me. We stood side by side in my doorway, which is where I'd told her we'd meet him, and I felt her shoulder square up next to mine. "Mr. Pell," she said before I could speak, and her voice didn't shake at all, "you'll not speak of me as a thing pledged. I'm not in your paper. My father borrowed money. I never signed a line of it." Pell smiled like she was a child saying something clever. "The estate stands the debt, Miss Calloway. The law's clear enough." "It is," I said. "It's clear enough." And I took out my own paper. It's so clear, in fact, that I had your figures checked against a real ledger, your debtor's own books, witnessed and sworn before the magistrate down in Sable not 2 weeks back. Calloway borrowed $80. He paid down all but 31 of it before he died, every payment dated and marked, harness against the note. The other $209 you've got written there. I let it sit a second, your clerk made up. Interest never agreed, charges never owed, a service you invented. It's not a debt, Pell. Past $31, it's a swindle on a dead man, and the magistrate's already got the sworn copy of it. For the first time the smile went off of Royal Pell's face. I stepped down off my porch into my own yard, and I'll tell you I wasn't afraid, which surprised me, because I'd spent 11 years arranging my life, so I'd never have anything left to be afraid of losing, and here I was with everything to lose and not afraid at all. There's a thing that happens to a man when he's standing in front of what's his and what's right, both at once. The fear just isn't in it. "Here's how it'll go," I said. I reached into my coat and took out a small sack of coin and held it up. $31 and the odd cents, the whole of the true debt in lawful money. I'll pay it now in front of your men as witnesses, and you'll mark the note settled and hand it over, and that's the end of the rope you've been letting out. I tossed the sack. It landed at the buggy's wheel and not in his hand, and he had to decide whether to send a man down for it like a beggar. "And if you'd rather not, if you'd rather hold to your padded paper and your pledge, then we'll all of us ride to the county seat together this morning, you and me and your sworn figures and Calloway's, and we'll let a judge read both, and we'll see how Royal Pell's good name in 3 counties holds up once it's known how he keeps his books. Your choice. But the woman's not in it. The woman was never in it. That part's done either way." The silence in that yard. I can hear it yet. Dolph looked at his employer, and the two other men looked at the sack of coin in the dirt and at the word magistrate hanging in the air, and Royal Pell sat in his good coat and did the arithmetic that men like him always do, the cold reckoning of what a thing will cost, and he saw that the rope was cut. He saw that the $31 was nothing and the magistrate was everything, and that a man whose whole power rests on being thought a patient, lawful man cannot afford to be drug into court over a swindled dead harness maker, not in front of every teamster and rancher in 3 counties who'd come to hear it. "Pick it up," he said to Dolph, not looking at the sack, not looking at me, not looking at Wren. Dolph got down and picked the coin out of the dirt and counted it, and it was right because I'd counted it 3 times, and Pell took out the note and his pen, and he marked it settled and paid in full, and he handed it to Dolph to hand to me because he'd not hand it to me himself. And then Royal Pell reined his buggy around in my yard, and the last thing he did before he drove off was look at Wren, one long look, and whatever he meant to put in it she met it straight on and didn't flinch, and so it broke against her like water on a rock and did her no harm at all. Then he was gone down the Mill Creek Road in his good coat, and the dust of him settled, and it was over. We stood in the yard a while after, not saying much. I had the note in my hand, marked paid, the rope cut clean, and I held it out to her because it was hers more than mine. It was her father's name on it, her father's honest $31 I'd settled. "That's yours," I said. She took it and looked at it a long moment, the figures, her father's old debt set right at last, and then she folded it small and put it in her pocket the way she'd kept her tools. "I'll pay you back the $31, she said. "Every cent. I'll work it off. I keep account." "You'll do no such thing," I said, and then I caught myself because that was me telling her what she'd do, and I'd sworn I'd never be that, so I said it different. "What I mean is I'd take it as a kindness if you'd let it be a gift the once, but it's yours to decide. If you'd rather work it off, you'll work it off, and I'll keep the account fair, and I'll not say another word." I almost smiled. "But I'd be glad if you'd let me give you one thing in your life that didn't come with a paper attached to it." What? She was quiet. The cold, bright morning was all around us, and the high country went on forever, and the dog leaned against her leg. "Jonah," she said, "ask me to stay." I knew what she meant. We both did. And I want to set down exactly how I answered, because it mattered then and it's mattered every day since. "No," I said. And before her face could fall, I went on. "I'll not ask you to stay. You've had men your whole grief's worth tell you where you belong, your father's debt told you, Pell's paper told you, the whole country's been telling you you're a thing to be settled and pledged and kept. I'll not be one more voice telling you what to do, not even the kindest one, so I'll not ask you to stay." I took both her hands then, and the scars on them small along the thumbs, the leatherworker's hands. "I'll tell you what's true and let you choose. It's true that I've a place here, and good water, and a barn that wants a harness hand and a kitchen that's been too quiet 11 years. It's true that I'd build you a workshop of your own off the south wall where the morning light's best, and put your name over the door, Calloway, your own, kept, and any teamster in this country could bring you his harness and pay you direct, and the money'd be yours and the books yours and the work yours. And it's true," and here my old buried voice near gave out, but I made it go on, "it's true that I love you. That I quit caring 11 years ago because caring cost too much, and you came up my road in the cold and started the caring back up again before I had a say in it, and now I'd sooner have the cost than go back to being a man who feels nothing. That's all true. And now it's yours to choose free, with a paid note in your pocket and a road that runs both directions, and I'll stand by whatever you decide and call it right." She looked at me a long time. The wind came down off the rim, and then she did a thing I didn't expect. She laughed, a real one, the first full laugh I'd heard out of her, and there were tears in it, but it was a laugh, and she said, "You're a hard man to run from, Jonah Teague. I've tried twice now." "Don't run then," I said, "but only if staying's what you want." "It's what I want," she said, "me, of my own self. Not the debt and not the cold and not Royal Pell and not any paper, me, I'm choosing it. And she took my face in her two scarred hands, and that's the closest I'll come to telling it, because the rest of that morning belongs to us and not to the page. We married in the spring, under the cottonwood, with Hetty Dawes and half of Burnt Fork there, the half that had decided we were respectable and the half that had decided we were interesting, both turning out, which is the most a man can hope for from a town. I built her the workshop off the south wall like I'd said, and we hung a sign over the door that said CALLOWAY. Leather, her own name kept, her own trade, and inside a year teamsters were coming from past Sable to have their harness done by the woman who'd learned it at her father's bench, and she kept her own books in that small even hand, and the money was hers, and she'd show me the account of an evening, and I'd tell her it was more than fair, and she'd tell me fair was fair. And we'd argue about it the only way we ever argued, each trying to give the other the better of it, all the rest of our years. Royal Pell I never had trouble from again. A man whose power rests on being thought patient and lawful learns fast which fights aren't worth the having, and ours had cost him his rope and near cost him his name, and he let us be. The magistrate's sworn copy of old Calloway's books stayed on file at the county seat, and that was a fence around us better than any rifle. I'm an old man now, telling this by the same fire she first warmed her hands at. The cottonwood's bigger. The sign over the workshop's weathered gray, but you can still read the name. And I think sometimes about the man I was that first cold night, a man who'd buried his own heart on purpose to keep it safe, and called the burying wisdom. I had it backward, I know that now. A heart kept buried isn't safe. It's just not living. The cost of caring is real. I'll never tell you it isn't. I've paid it once under that tree, and I'll pay it again before I'm done, but the cost of not caring is everything. Paid out a little every day, and you don't even get a grave to show for it. She came up my road in the cold carrying her dead father's tools because she meant to keep herself, and she did keep herself every day of our life together, her own woman with her own name and her own trade and her own free choice. I never owned 1 minute of her. That was the whole of it. That was why it lasted. A man can stand in a doorway and say enough. It's the smallest thing. You'd think it would take more. It only ever took that.